Okay, sorry for the technical delays, and I hope you all had a good time listening to experts who really made this happen, who I want to thank so much. David, Benjamin, all of Beth Jacob, thank you. And let's really start, because this is the last of the series. And how and when this will continue, we'll figure it out. But right now, of the 5 series that we plan together with Beth Jacob, this is the last one. And this should take us to the edge of modernity. And the next series, whenever that is, will begin literally where this leaves off and take us exactly how, I'm not sure, to what we call the modern era, and figure out Jewish history at that point, which of course is much more complicated when we get to the modern period. We left you off pretty much in Christian Spain, where Jews are not a very large number, but they're growing in number quite significantly, and they encounter Christianity. And we discussed this idea of Christological debates and issues of what verses mean. And again, just to repeat it, Christians search the Old Testament, what we call Torah, what they call the Old Testament, and we try not to refer to it by that because we call it the Jewish Bible, if you want, and the Christian Bible. But they call it the Old Testament, the Old Covenant God had given up on the Jewish people and made a new covenant with the followers of Jesus, hence the New Testament. Now, Jews have to live with Christians in many societies. They're respected for who they are, and it's a two-way street. They respect each other. Each one keeps their distance. But the church continues, as it comes to the 13th century, to solidify its own beliefs. It has crystallized clear, having dealt with a number of heresies in Christianity, exactly what it is all about. So having said that, they begin to realize that they're pretty sophisticated. They've dealt, for example, with the concepts of Aristotle. Now, much of that came to Christianity through great church philosophers like Thomas Aquinas. Now, Thomas Aquinas was okay with Aristotle because he read Maimonides, and actually will quote Rabbi Moses many times in his book. But now they felt sophisticated enough to start on a new program. Now, let me explain what that is and how it all came about. Christianity always wondered what was the purpose of the Jews. If indeed they had rejected Jesus, then why should they be in the world at all? And different philosophies came up out of the Christian thinkers. Most famous one is the 4th century of St. Augustine, the doctrine of the witness. We need to keep the Jews around to be witnesses to the truth of Christianity. Meaning, and there's this long quotation, that they are at veritas, they are the verification. They verify Christianity by pointing at the Jews, and that idea of St. Augustine, called the doctrine of the witness, basically said that the Jewish people are the witnesses to the truth of Christianity. We need to keep them around. We point to them. They're bad people. They're not the greatest. Look at them. They're dispersed. They're the wandering Jews across the world, but they verify Christianity. As much as it sounded negative, because some other ideas came, no, let's wipe them all out and just keep one Jew. Others said, no, they exist there. Yet, at the end of the day, the doctrine of the witness allowed the Jews to survive. Because it allowed the Jews to survive, as we come to the 13th century, and now, why don't we do what Christianity always wanted to do? It's a missionizing religion. We need to missionize them. There's something wrong with them. And many philosophers in Christianity came up with notions that the Jews are blind, the Jews are led by the devil. It's this idea that they are the devil and carnal notion of the Jews. They're abstinent, as the Bible says, they're Yam Kshei Oref. They refuse to believe what is so clear to us. So maybe we need to figure out a way to really start to missionize them, but not just simply missionize them, because they're sophisticated, they're learned, but now so is the church by the 13th century and on. We have good arguments. And therefore, let's figure out ways that we can do this. Now, what begins to happen, and I'm going to slowly pull up a document that I want to share with you, and then we'll read part of it together when we share the screen. But this document will begin to show us a particular idea that comes up now. But let me backtrack a little bit. And that is that there were some Jews, for whatever good or bad reason, who converted to Christianity. And these Jews, many of them, did it out of the clear belief. They believed Christianity is true. And they gave up Judaism. Many did it for economic reasons, et cetera, et cetera. So you have all kinds. Again, the numbers are small, but to the church, every Jew that converted was a significant one. Somewhere in the 1200s, a Jew his Jewish name we lose, who becomes known in history as Nicholas Donin, converts to Christianity. Now, this Nicholas Donin reputedly was a student of one of the Sophists, Rabbi Eliezer Mituk, who studied with the great Rabbi Yitzchak, who indeed was the nephew of Rabbeinu Tam. So he was a very learned student, so to say, who learned the Talmud very well, who converts to Christianity. And this particular person, Nicholas Donin, contact that he has, makes Pope Gregory IX aware of something that Christianity never thought of before. The books that the Jews study are not what we think.
No, I just muted.
What happened? Okay. Can you all hear me? Someone in one of the screens, just shake your head if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Did you lose that? Okay. So now.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody good? Thank you. I got the message both on the screen and I looked up little screen, someone shook their head. Whoever you are, thank you. So now, this Nicholas Donin studied the Talmud and makes the Pope Gregory IX, aware that the Jewish people don't even spend much time learning the Bible. They're not the people.
I have it on now.
Is it any good?
I just heard one sentence.
All right, go you watch it. You keep telling it.
Okay. Someone needs to mute their screen. Why some,
Yeah, you're very good.
I don't know if you all hear it, but I heard it.
Okay, bye.
All right.
Okay.
Push your button where it says
Sorry
mute.
for the interruption, but let's go on. So now, this up on the screen for a second. Someone disabled the attendee screen sharing. Do we need to change that? Can you all see this, or you still see me?
The problem with this thing is people can interrupt him.
Oh, really?
You could talk to him. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know. Sometimes they say that. Okay, turn it off.
I think I'm going to leave it.
Guys, please shut.
All right, bye.
Do you all see a text on the screen?
No.
Oh.
Okay, so then let's go back.
The host needs to enable
Someone
sharing.
took away the ability.
Oh, right now,
You saw something?
there's a picture of ocean.
No, it should be a picture of a text.
Dr.
Dr. Lieberman, you need to get everyone to mute. Otherwise, we're never going to hear you. So everyone needs to mute. That includes
Right.
people who
But
are not.
that should have been done by the host who passed it on to me. Guys, please mute. I don't have that ability. I am not the host, I guess. So let's go on then, and I'll do it orally I have the text in front of me. So please, again, if your mics are on, mute them. And if you even want to mute your screen or shut your screen or your video, I don't have to see you either. Okay, so here's what Pope Gregory sent out after being informed about the Talmud. It is said about the Jews of France, and if this is true, no punishment would be sufficiently worthy of this crime. For they, the Jews we have heard, are not content with the old law which God gave Moses in writing. In fact, the Pope says, they even ignore it completely and affirm that God gave another law called the Talmud. That is teaching, translation of Talmud, handed down to Moshe orally. Falsely, they allege, the Jews allege, that it was implanted within their minds and unwritten. Torah Shebal Peh. Please, someone, whoever's your mic is on, please shut it. So falsely they allege that this was unwritten and was there preserved until certain men came along that they call the sages, the scribes, who, fearing that this law might be lost from the minds of men through forgetfulness, reduced it to writing. And by the volume of this Talmud, by the way, far exceeds the text of the Talmud. In this book is contained matters so abusive, says the Pope, the Talmud, and so unspeakable that it arouses shame in those who mention it and horror in those who hear it. And suddenly the Talmud was charged with 5 major offenses. And the Pope had permission to do this for the simple reason that in 1215, this is around 1240 now, in a second, the Fourth Lateran Council. Lateran councils, when church officials get together and issue rules for all Christendom. And one of the rules that was declared in 1215 at the Fourth Lateran Council was this notion that heretical books which threaten Christianity, could be destroyed. That is, by the way, what also caused, we spoke of this 2 or 3 lectures back, the burning of the books of Maimonides in 1232. So books could be burned. So these 5 charges, which I'll get to in a minute, are brought against the Talmud. Therefore, says the Pope, since this is said to be the most important reason why the Jews remain abstinent in their perfidy, why are Jews not converting? We have good arguments. It's because of the Talmud. They read this book. This book is what they spend their time doing. We earnestly urge and warn that on the first Saturday of Lent to come, in 1240, while the Jews are gathered in the synagogue on Shabbat, you by your own authority shall seize all the books belonging to the Jews of your kingdom, this is in France, those subjects to your authority, as well as those subject to the authority of your vassals, your nobles, and you shall hold these books in custody with the Dominican friars and the Franciscan friars. So suddenly, copies and copies of the books of the Talmud are taken away from the Jewish community on Shabbat while they're all in shul, and this definitely was done in Paris. And the books were put away. And immediately, the king at this time, Louis IX, same number like the Pope, Gregory IX, Louis IX, who had received this order, orders that there be a literal trial. Take the Talmud to court, charge it. Now, who should defend the Talmud? We'll get a bunch of rabbis whose name I'll mention in a minute. But the charges against them were, of course, because there are statements in the Talmud about Jesus, about Yeshu, they're derogatory and they're heretical. And there are statements against Jesus, supposedly. We'll discuss them in a minute. The authority of the Talmud was questioned. Who gives this book authority? The Bible has authority. Why do the Jews now suddenly, in addition, what's the actual power of the rabbis themselves? They seem to listen to these rabbis. They're human beings. They're not divine. They have no divine connection. What gives them any power at all? And then what upset them very much, and this was what the Pope called abusive, in the Talmud many times you'll find notions where, wait a second, the Talmud will say, if you walk down the street and you find an item, if it belongs to a Jew, you have to return it. If it belongs to a non-Jew, okay, granted, halakhically in practice, we don't do that today, but the Talmud straight out that you're the Jew, your fellow, your brother, he comes first. If I need to save a life, whose life do I save first? Whose property do I worry about? Now, what does that in this book? That means if they touch our wine, and suddenly they also got very confused, and this would be like the fifth notion of what we would call the Agadat HaTalmud. The stories in the Talmud made no sense to Christianity. For example, they quoted the Gemara or the Talmud that says at the end of Masechet Brachot that when Hashem cries, his teardrops fall into the ocean, and suddenly there's an earthquake. Now, these charges against the Talmud. Rabbis were rounded up, not being told why, and immediately they were told, okay, you're staying here. There's going to be a Talmud trial. You need to defend it. Now, the most famous one, Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, also one of the Josephist, who will become the major spokesman at this disputation. In addition, names of other Tosafists like Yehuda Melon, the famous Rabbi Yehuda Sirleon, and then, of course, Rabbi Moshe of Kusi, the author of that very famous halachic work called Smag, Sefer Mitzvot Gadol. They're under, so to say, house arrest by the church to be able to defend this Talmud. The Jewish community is quite in shock when the word gets out that the Talmud is on trial. They've realized something is wrong and all these copies have been taken away. And in June of 1240, in the royal palace of King Louis IX are these rabbis, and on the other side is Nicholas Donin. And Nicholas Donin has convinced the Pope that he is able to prove from the Talmud that it is a heretical book, it's a book against Jesus, a book against Christianity, it contains offensive things to Christians, etc., etc. Now, what are the rabbis going to do? These are statements in the Talmud. And a tremendous amount of pressure is now on the Jewish community. How will they defend this book? Now, Yechiel of Paris, the main spokesman, speaks. Present, by the way, are church officials, the king, of course, the queen, the queen mother, Blanche of Louis IX, she's also in attendance here. And they all can't wait to see the reaction of the rabbis. And of course, their notion was that if they disprove this Talmud and we forbid it, then we can successfully convert the Jews, or at least it'll be much easier. And we'll figure this out, but now we have this great Nicholas Donin in our midst who will actually be able to do this. So lo and behold, the trial starts, and to his credit, Yechiel of Paris explains, look, we have an oral law. The oral law was never written down. This oral law explains the book that you guys call the book, the Old Testament. It explains the difficulties. Not every verse is clear. There are contradictions in the book. And he goes through some of them. So Jews relied on this text as an aid to explain the Old Testament. It's not a book against it. The rabbis have authority, and he goes to explain in how rabbis have authority, how much their authority. And he explains what the Talmud is. He explains the role of the Agadah. His most difficult role is explaining the concepts, two things. The negative things said about non-Jews, to which he says, wait a second, we're not referring to you Frenchmen when we speak of non-Jews in the Talmud. In fact, we speak of the people who worship idols, the nations of Canaan, the Canaanites. You worship whatever, you worship God in some sense, and therefore we don't refer to you. So we're honored to live amongst you. So these references in the Talmud about non-Jews are referring to the 7 nations of Canaan, etc. And by the way, Jesus in the Talmud, the quotations you quote are not Jesus. Well, let's look at the dates. In fact, he says, the Talmud equates, as far as chronologically, Yeshu with the time of Yeshua ben Parachia, who was 100-some years, 120-some years before Jesus of Christianity, which by implication meant either the Christians got the wrong Jesus or the Talmud was talking about a different Jesus. In fact, the way he speaks, he says, and he turns literally to King Louis, and he says, look, the name of Yeshua, which is the Hebrew name of Jesus, Yeshu, that's a common name. And he looks at King Louis, the way the text has come to us, and he says, not every Louis in France is the monarch. You're the king. Yes, it's you, but like Yeshua is a common Jewish name. Who says it's your Jesus? And why should the Talmud mention you, Jesus? In fact, the way Yechiel of Paris speaks, it's almost 5 different Jesuses that he speaks about as these quotations are there. The trial ends, and sadly enough, the verdict is not given. But what does happen is that 2 years later, in 1242, also in the month of June, 24 cartloads, these books of the Talmud that had been set away with the Dominicans and the Franciscan friars, are taken out and they're burnt. This was the first burning of the Talmud in 1242, which came about as this effort to try to convert Jews. Now, Yechiel of Paris leaves France and makes Aliyah. So, which is kind of interesting. Can't stay around. There is no, thank God, as the Jewish records indicate, there is no physical repercussion on the Jews at the time. But now copies of the Talmud in this part of the world are very scarce. That, by the way, as some great Jewish scholars have shown, especially Chaim Soloveitchik, the Rav's son, that in no way impeded the intellectual growth of the Jewish community. The fact that they could learn books like the Rif and other books, and even their Chidushim to the Talmud, and they made copies quite quickly, and life went on. So this did not at all deter, which many people have thought, oh, now Talmud learning in that part of the world diminishes. Not at all. That did not happen. But this caused the Jews to understand that the game is changing in Europe. These debates and the part of the church to now allow the Jews and suffer them in their midst meant that a certain amount of pressure will always come from the church to the Jews. Again, to go back to a lecture 4 back, Jews in Europe still in this particular time period and for quite a while are owned by the king. They're the king's property. So the church can only operate as successfully as it did here in France because King Louis was a very good Catholic. Other kings were not, and we'll come to them in a minute. But let's stop right here for a second and go back to something we haven't discussed at all, which we need to discuss to come to the modern period. And that is the Jews of Spain, which is really a long topic unto itself, but we have to give it some time to come to the points that I want to discuss today and eventually leave us at the cusp of modernity. Jews in Spain had come to Spain quite early. Some claim very early. But at least the records that we find of clear evidence of Jews in Spain, let's say 5th century, 6th century, 7th century, even earlier, maybe 4th century, there are Jews in Spain living under what's known as the Visigothic kings, who were very harsh to the Jewish community. Eventually, as we all know, and we spoke about it briefly, the Muslim conquest comes and Spain is overrun, most of Spain, by Muslims. And that leads us into what we call the Golden Age of Spain, which we spoke about. The Golden Age of Spain produced the great grammarians that we spoke about and eventually led to this philosophy that comes to the Jews of Spain through Aristotle and translation in Arabic that the Maimonides dealt with that we spoke about. And they did pretty well. But slowly, this community gets reconquered in the famous Reconquista as we come to the end of the 1100s and 1200s by Christendom. Christendom comes and pushes the Muslims out, pretty much out of almost all of Spain, except for the bottom of Spain, which is not Granada. So Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, basically has gone from Christianity, Islam, Christianity, and then it stays here. And the Jews in Spain are involved in all types of businesses. Yes, they do money lending, as Jews do in many societies, but here they're artisans, they're in commerce, they're involved in all kinds of businesses. Really, Jews have, in Spain, starting with the Golden Age and then progressing under Christendom too, Jews pay their taxes and they live literally wherever they want, and things are not that bad. In fact, as Christianity comes, Jews begin to be known as, in many cases, as the Jew at court. There were Jews in the courts of some of the monarchs in Spain, some, again, very religious, some not, but the Jews had their interests represented by the Jew at court. So the Jews fare pretty decently. Again, we can argue about that, be that as it may, it goes on that way. Very soon after the debate that we joke about in 1240 in Paris, in Spain, in the city of Barcelona. Now, if you remember what a map of Spain looks like, and hopefully whenever these lectures start, I'll be the host and I'll share my screen with you, but you all remember Spain. Just think of Portugal, then comes Spain, Granada at the bottom. Again, Portugal, that sliver, then comes Spain. Spain was actually divided, if you remember your good Spanish history, into a number of kingdoms. Right next to Portugal, and the bottom part was what we call Andalusia. On top of that was the kingdom of Castilla. After that, a sliver on the Mediterranean, which was known as Aragon and Leone. All the way on top, there was a smaller kingdom called Navarre. And this is where Jews lived, all around. Now, each one obviously had its own monarch. So in the area of what is known as Aragon, which today you might know better as Catalonia, where Barcelona is, the king of Aragon in this particular time period is James I of Aragon. He was also known as James the Conqueror. He was a Catholic king, but not a very good Catholic. Not good at all. He goes to confession and then commits every sin he wants to, and he does whatever he wants. And a similar story unfolds in Spain now in 1263, only some 20 years after Rabbi Yechiel defended the Talmud, but the Talmud was found guilty and set to flames in Barcelona, in the capital of Aragon at this point. And it plays out with another convert to Christianity, and this is the more famous, and many of you probably know this story well. That's the story of what we call Frau Paulo, Brother Paul, or Pablo Cristiani, who also a Jew, who is actually a protege of Louis IX, who convinces a very important clergyman, Catholic one, in Spain, whose name is Raymond Penaforte, that he studied Talmud just as well. And France failed in its debate because he, this new convert to Christianity, is able to prove from the Talmud, from the Talmud, that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. He could do this. The Talmud states it. The Jews are just too blind to see it. This Raymond approaches the Pope, the Pope too. It was Clement IV, who gives his blessing to whatever Raymond will do. But Raymond takes it to King James and tells King James, look, there were Jews here in Catalonia. They didn't call it Catalonia, even though it was Aragon. You're the king. Let's have a debate with the most famous rabbi in Spain. And I have a convert, Pablo Cristiani, who will convince the audience that the truth of Christianity is in the Talmud itself. He's a very learned convert, and we can prove this. King James, coming very much from a pagan understanding, even though he claims he's Catholic, pagans were great in the sense that they knew what a fair fight was. If you want to invite, let's play this game fair, the way the records tell us. He actually might even suggest that if the rabbi makes a great case for Judaism, then we'll all convert. Are you ready to do that? Of course, Raymond laughs it off. But lo and behold, after speaking with Nachmanides, and they knew each other for other reasons, Nachmanides is forced into a debate in Spain in 1263. So here's the Spanish Jewish community, a very different interaction overall, not like the one that was experienced in the Ashkenazi country with the Crusades. And therefore, suddenly, the Ramban does not want to participate. Now, the Ramban wrote a record of this particular debate, of this disputation. He got in trouble for writing it, as we'll see in a minute. But in it, he tells us he refused. There's nothing good can come out of this, because the Jews are not going to convert, and the Jews don't believe in Christianity. So no matter what you try, I think we have an argument for it. But he's forced to, okay, I'll do it on one condition, that I have freedom of speech. Now, this debate of the Ramban in Barcelona in 1263 was the only debate of all Christendom, and there are dozens of them, where the Jewish side had total freedom of choice, of saying what they wanted to do, and not afraid. Now, at which point the Ramban wants to clarify, which means I might say insulting things, or at least things which will be heretical to Christians. Look, I'm not here to hurt people. This is not a personal thing, but I might speak of things against the dogma or dogmas of Christianity. And King James says, I'm in charge here. I'm the king. We're not like Frenchmen. And you will have total freedom of speech. Now, the dates are set, and in July of 63, from July 20th to July 24th, basically over 3 sessions, the Ramban and part of the Jewish community are invited to participate. The Jewish community is nervous. Now, the point that they want to bring out from the point of view of the church was the following questions. Based on what I just said, question was, had the Messiah come? Has Jesus already arrived and you Jews are just not being careful to who he is? Question 2, is this Messiah, this Mashiach that you Jews believe in, is he divine or is he human? Like that made a difference to them. And then on the issue of which religion, which faith is the correct faith? Is it Judaism or is it Christianity, based on what will come at this? Now, what's interesting in this debate, because the Ramban had total freedom of speech, immediately he asks, what is the evidence that you have? Whereupon Pablo Cristiani quotes a number of statements from the Midrash that basically say things like, on the day that Mashiach was born, this happened. Now, Mashiach wasn't born yet. Or you can find statements that speak of like Mashiach wanting to come and whatever. There are statements that imply that he's come. Also, in Masechet Sukkah, there's a statement that speaks of a Mashiach ben Yosef, which is a whole different discussion we can have one day. What's the role of Messiah in the Jewish religion, and how could there be two Mashiachs? Well, to give it simple, there's a Messiah not from Shevet David, but from Yosef, Mashiach ben Yosef, according to some opinions, and he will come before Mashiach ben David, and that one dies. Now wait a second, it was Yeshua ben Yosef, Jesus the son of Joseph. Okay, is he the son of God? You don't bring that into this discussion right now. But if the Talmud speaks of a Messiah, I have all these proofs in the Talmud about a Messiah having come, and you Jews are blind. At which point, the Ramban says, look, you are dealing with Midrash, and you're dealing with Agadah. Do you know what Agadah is? And at this point, he basically makes a very interesting point, which many Rishonim and other great rabbis have adopted, and it's become a pretty common standard notion. But the Ramban says it straight out, and it's been said both before him. The Gaonim had such a point of view, which is that the Midrash is nothing binding. The Midrash is there to explain verses. It's there to teach an idea. Many times it's not to be taken literally. And therefore, much of what's in the Talmud is this Midrash and this Agadah. Those are not binding. Mitzvot, commandments, are binding. Halacha is binding. Now, to a Christian, that doesn't make sense. This kind of a holy book that has binding things and not binding, what kind of book is that? Everything is binding, or how would you go, this is binding, this is not binding. So Ramban goes on to explain, look, these Midrashim are what you call in Spanish, and he uses the word, what you would call in English, and I'll use the word from the Latin, sermons. They're sermons. Someone gets up and makes a sermon. That's all this is. It's there to inspire. It's there to give hope. It has other messages, and therefore its simple meaning, one needs not to worry. Now, immediately that argument is like, okay, we're done. But Pablo has to find something to argue, and his comments will be, look at the success of Christianity. Look at the churches, these huge buildings, Notre Dame, and the churches of Spain that are magnificent, built in the name of Jesus and Christianity. And what are you Jews? A lonely people, low people, despised. No one likes you. Obviously, just by the sheer number and the success, we have won the game. So give up your idea and join the faith of Christianity. Look how much better the world is because Jesus has come. At which point the Ramban grabs onto that point because it's so easily turned around from the Jewish perspective. Who says this world is a better world? In what way has your Jesus made the world better, Ramban will say? If anything, look at the amount of casualties he's brought into the world. And the argument turns the other way. It might be success for you, but it's not for everybody else. Besides, you and Muslims fight all the time about, so where is the peace that Yeshayahu Hanavi promised? And where are all these things? And therefore, that argument pretty much gets settled, at least from the Jewish point of view. The debate ends, and Nachmanides Ramban is awarded, okay, I think you won the debate. In fact, the way the story goes, King James gave Nachmanides 300 golden coins or ducats, whatever version you want, saying, I've never seen a person argue a particular notion I don't agree with as well as you did. Here is this, but the book should not be published. Now, if you study church records which have been released, this debate there is obviously won by the Catholic Church. The community feels absolutely upset because no one's really won. They think they've won. And then rumors are spread that the Jews lost the debate, at which point the Ramban decides he will write an account of what happens, and that's the excuse why he wrote it. Eventually, papal authorities discover that Nachmanides had written this book, and it's still around. You can buy it. You can see it online probably in its entirety, where he is asked actually to be killed. King James will not do that, but he is said to him, and 3 years later, when this is all settled in 1267, the Ramban leaves Spain and actually travels to the land of Israel, where he also makes Aliyah. So this debate caused Aliyah, if that's at least something. But from here on, Jews in Spain really understand that this pressure will only grow. Jump with me to 1391. Now, everybody knows the Spanish date of 1492 when we speak of the expulsion of Jews. But let me explain what happens, and this is very important as we come to the third point, and then we'll come to an end. 1391. From the time of this debate, as the 1200s come to an end and we enter the 1300s, Christianity in Spain grows, intensifies. There are feelings of increased piety. Christians believe in their faith deeply and want to be better Christians. And therefore, they wonder about the Jews in the again. How can we get these people? And there are clearly preachers who speak in their churches, to use the word again, they sermonize about the evil of the Jews, and they're our next door neighbors. We do business with them. And in 1391, that's 100 years before the expulsion. Imagine, 1492, 1391, there is a massive, across Spain, and this is literally in Aragon, definitely in Castile, major cities, Seville, whatever. There are, 1391 again, major attacks on Jews by the mobs, by church officials, whoever, with one clear notion in mind. Give the Jews a choice at the edge of a sword, convert to Christianity or die. 1391, there is conversion of Jews en masse to Christianity. Now, some Jews convert and actually believe it. Again, we don't have numbers. And they become good Christians and stay that way, and their life goes on, and they mingle into Spanish society. There are Jews who run away, who escape to other towns where there is no persecution, and somehow they get away. But it's at this point in 1391 that we all know, and this is when it begins, and we speak of what history calls the Morano Jews, or the converso population. So just to make things very clear, the ideas of Moranos in Spain, the idea of Jews who live in secrecy, of conversos, these crypto Jews, goes on for 100 years. Which means there's a second generation and a third generation of Jews who on Sunday will go to church, eat the host, the Eucharist, say Mass, have the name of Pedro, but then on Shabbat, they're in someone's basement with sand on the floor, not to make noise because it's now a shul, where they get an Aliyah and their name is Reuven. So this new population that lives in a dual world starts to slowly increase. Now there's a second generation. That second generation grows up knowing of nothing else except living this dual life. Now, to make things clear, these Jews cannot have a mezuzah on their door. Their male children cannot have a Brit Milah, too obvious and too clear. Yet somehow, and this is a long, different discussion, they maintain their Jewish identity in the second and third and even fourth generation. The evidence is humongous. Much has been written about this. One of the famous Jewish historians of this period was Bibi's father, Ben Zion Netanyahu, who wrote much about this. And so did a whole number of other Jewish historians. Only recently it's come to light of the important role that women played in making sure that the second and third and fourth generation of children are educated and staying Jewish. But because Jews have now infiltrated, really infiltrated, the highest echelons of the church itself. So here there are people who is the bishop of, and the bishop of, so I'll get back to that in a minute, but imagine how this works. But somewhere after 1391, a very famous rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Halevi from the city of Burgos. Rabbi Shlomo Halevi of Burgos, great rabbi with yeshiva, whose name, by the way, is mentioned in the Shelot and Shivot of the Rivash. The Rivash, one of the great Rishonim that came out of Spain, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Sheshet, in his responses speaks to, in writing, we have the records, many times to him and about him, and calls him a Chacham Gadol BaTorah, and a number of other things. This Shlomo Halevi converts to Christianity. That was a shock to the Jewish community. Okay, imagine, God forbid, take your favorite rabbi of ancient times or Middle Ages, take your favorite rabbi today. Imagine if Rabbi X, and don't give me names and don't think of whatever, just have a terrible thought in your mind for a second and let it go. But imagine Rabbi blank converts to Christianity. One of the students of this Rabbi Shlomo Halevi was a Jew by the name of Yeshua Lorki. Yeshua Lorki was a physician, studied with this particular Rabbi Shlomo, and upon his conversion, the student was shocked. And the letter has survived. It's a long, touching, poignant letter where this Yeshua Halorki says to his former teacher, "My dear master, I'm trying to wrap my head around your conversion. You were a great scholar of Torah. Why did you convert? Is it because," and he now goes through a number of reasons, is it because maybe you thought that Christianity is true? And well, it can't be that, because you have clearly spoken so many times of why Jews are not Christians. So it couldn't be that. Is it because you will now have wealth and money, fame, and indeed Shlomo Halevi became like the bishop of Burgos, the very city where he was the chief rabbi? Is it that, but you've always lived a life of poverty, and you spoke how learning Torah will never make you rich, and you were not okay with it, but that was an ideal to you? Is it because of philosophy that you studied philosophy and it convinced you that? He went through all the arguments. At the end, he says to Shlomo, his teacher, Rabbi Shlomo, I don't know what it was. Now, if there was an answer or not, we're not really sure. But be that as it may, what happens, and get ready for this, this Yeshua Halorki, who wrote this letter, somewhere in the early 1400s, after 1392, converts to Christianity too. Takes on the name of Geronimo de Santa Fe, and lo and behold, he has converted to Christianity. Now, this was a shock again, but these things were happening at this time. Now, this Geronimo de Santa Fe, Yeshua Halorki, a student of this Rabbi Shlomo, in connection with a very famous preacher whose name was Vincent Ferrer, plot out the most devastating debate that Judaism of 1413, 1414. Again, in Spain, 1413 to 1414. It spreads literally almost over 2 years. And here's what this Vincent Ferrer, with the help of the Pope, ended up doing. Imagine the following for a minute. Imagine if suddenly the United States rabbis, all of them, the famous rabbis of New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, were taken out of their communities and called to a particular city. And that is what happens in Spain. The famous rabbis, just to give you one or two, Rabbi Ashtruk Halevi, Rabbi Yosef Albo, the author of the Sefer Hikarim, Rabbi Moshe ben Abbas, etc., all pulled out of their cities, taken to a city in Catalonia known as Tortosa. They're under house arrest. The rabbis are all together, but not speaking to each other. And they have no idea why they're there. The communities have basically bereft of their rabbis. They're all called in, and Vincent Ferrer informs them, with Yeshua Halorki, the convert, that you will all participate in the debate, and you will defend the Talmud again. But this time, there's no freedom of speech. We will bring the charges, and you will answer. And Jews are now forced to attend this debate in Tortosa. Now, in the interim, while all these rabbis from all these great communities are under house arrest, the church will send preachers, missionaries, if you want, to their communities, where on Shabbat, because there is no rabbi, the drasha is now delivered by a Catholic official. This disputation was so rigged against the rabbis, because here's what they did. They would call a rabbi on stage and say to him, how about the following statement in the Talmud? What does it mean? And the rabbi will give an explanation. Thank you, Rabbi. Pull him off the stage. Now people are watching this, mainly Jews. And a different rabbi who had no idea what the previous rabbi said will be asked the same question. Now you know and I know that on the same Talmudic passage, on the same midrash, two rabbis will give different explanations, which is exactly what happens here. At this point, the person on the stage, Yeshua Halorki, now Geronimo de Santa Fe, we turn to the audience and say, what kind of rabbis are these? They themselves couldn't give you a straight answer. This one said this, and this one said that. And in this debate, there's actual fabrication of Talmudic statements that did not exist. And when the rabbis will say, I have no idea what this is, it's at that point, I've never seen this Talmud. Rabbi, do you even know your Talmud? How could you people believe in these people? They don't even know their own book. Now, when this debate ends, after 69 sessions that spread over these 2 years, 69 times, 69 days of such a debate, this signaled the end, literally, of the Jewish community in Spain, so much longer before the expulsion, because what this ended up causing was, when this debate ended, over 100,000 Jews converted to Christianity, not as Moranos, okay? It seems these were gone. So it was a devastating debate and a sad one. But fast forward, just to make a long story short, and we'll end with this, as we come into the late 1470s and 1480s, the church realizes that the number of Jews, I'll give you one case of an inquisitional record, and when the inquisitional records were opened up, we found out an amazing amount of stuff about the Morano converso community. Imagine a bishop or a priest of a church who this time of the year before Pesach would have a doctor's note that he must eat a particular diet. There's something, he has a stomach ailment, and he must eat certain types of wafers or can't eat certain foods. Now, of course, the doctor who gave him the note, also a good Morano, but he can now eat matzah on Pesach. On Sukkot, for the last couple of years, he has some kind of an asthmatic condition where he needs a hut outside the church to go and stay in. He's got a sukkah. So under the guise of all these things, this community has started its own network, and we need to stop that. So in the early 1480s, the Inquisition comes into being. So Ferdinand and Isabella, who by now no longer single, have married. Aragon and Castile become one huge kingdom, ruled by both of them. And lo and behold, we know the story. 1482, the Jews of Spain, only those Jews who never converted leave. The Jews who converted were Christians. The Moranos can't just leave. There's some escape and mingle in there. Yeah, they don't. They can't. The minute they converted, they enter the jurisdiction of the church. So the Jews that leave are not the Moranos. That some will go, of course, but overall they stay. And of course, many immediately escape into Portugal. Eventually in 1497, they suffer the same fate. So these Jews that left, from a modern Jewish history perspective, and I use the word modern now, because the Middle Ages is about to end. These Jews go all around Europe and deep into the Ottoman Empire. And with these Jews, who Moranos, and now all these Jews who stayed true to the faith this entire period, literally begins the modern period for the Jewish people in a very different way. So I'm going to stop because I don't want to go over time. Let's make sure that it's pretty much to where we started. If you have any questions, let me just look at the chat if anybody posed any questions. And I thank you all for having been here, listened. How the next series will actually continue, I don't know. We'll let you know. Again, I want to thank Beth Jacob. I want to thank Benjamin. I want to thank David and the entire crew for allowing this. And I apologize for the few technical difficulties that we had in the beginning. And may we share Yeshuot Tovot and Besurot Tovot in our very difficult world. And let's all daven for each other and be there. And Hashem should be with every single one of you. And thank you so much and have a good night.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi. And if I may,
Thank you.
a request has been put out by Rabbi Lau, the head in Israel,
David Lau, Chief Rabbi.
David Lau, that women should fast on Wednesday for half a day with tefillot. And on Thursday,
Okay. For those of you who didn't hear it, maybe there is a fast day declared by the chief rabbinate of Israel. And if you can't fast, of course, don't. But if you can, at least for a few hours, half a day. Look, whatever we can do, ein lanu mashishon al avinu shebashamayim, and that's, we have to do what we need to do. So make your social distances, meet whatever you do. We can socially get together this way, which is the new world we're inheriting. But let's not put anyone's life in danger. Lo tamod al dam reacha. And
Amen.
therefore, Yeshuot Tovot. The month of Nisan starts soon, and Nisan is the Zman HaGeula. And let's v'niske kulanu b'yachad l'gula shlema b'mheira. Thank you,
Amen.
everybody, and good
Amen.
night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi Lieberman, this is Steve Schreier. Can you hear me?
Hey, how are you?
Yes,
Yep.
thank you. I have
Sure.
a quick question. Unfortunately,
Absolutely.
I missed last week. Is it possible that last week was recorded so that I could listen to it?
Yes, it was. And if it was, Beth Jacob has probably maybe on their website, or if you speak to David Schlacht or to Benjamin, someone has a tape of it. Yeah, absolutely was recorded. Okay. And if you need the handouts, you know what? Give me your email and I'll send them to you.
Thank you.
Oh, there he is.
I'll send it to him. I'll send it. Do you want me to send it to you or give it to you right now?
Oh, okay. Send it to me. Send it to me. You have mine? I'll give you my simple one, easy to remember, RAL, Rabbi Abraham Lieberman, RAL 4000, that's my age, at AOL. I still belong to
4,000?
AOL, one of the old members of AOL. So you can just send me
Rabbi,
yours,
for
I'll send it back
4,000
to
a
you.
year, you look great.
Sorry?
I said for 4,000 years, you look great.
Well, listen, it takes a lot of makeup.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not
it.
hard to do.
Thank you. Well
Don't forget,
done.
we're living in Hollywood. This is like, we're doing movies now. So amazing. Baruch Hashem. I was teaching all day online literally for the last week and now this week too. It's like fabulous. I just feel sometimes bad for the students and their mental health having to do it in this way, because that physical social interaction is really important for human beings. But all right, with Hashem's help, we'll figure it out. And we'll go on. All right, everybody. Good night. For those of you who are still on.
Laila Tov.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Yes. There you go.